This is Taylor Schaefer with Morgan James Publishing, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Necati Aydin about the new release of his book, 3D of Happiness. It is so great to be able to talk with you today, and thank you for joining me for the living room edition of your book launch. And I do have a couple of questions for you that I'd love to get the answers on, so let's go ahead and dive right in. So my first question is, there are already thousands of happiness books. Why did you decide to write another one?
Okay, so thank you for this opportunity. Very, I think good questions, and most people will perhaps ask the same things. There are actually two reasons for that one. The very first thing is, I think as a person, as a human being, I was born in a very deprived condition. And I define my conditions to be at the bottom of 1% of the entire world, with no electricity, no running water, no access to the healthcare, no access to even education beyond primary school. So, but then basically, like everyone else, I had the dream of to be happy, and the message I got it that if I somehow get money and travel and get what I like and do what I like, I will be happy. And I try to follow this one, and eventually I think I accomplished my dream to a certain extent because I managed to get to PhD, and I managed to climb up to, I will say, 1 percentile of, not, be better than 99% of people in terms of financial ability. And but then at this, when I reached to the peak of my career and accomplished what I have accomplished, I realized that actually the happiness was still missing for me. So, and that's how I decided to do further reading and research. And that's how I end up writing this book.
Mm-hmm. Yes, wonderful. And what are the three dimensions of happiness that 3D of Happiness talks about?
Basically, again, as I mentioned, what I find out, that all other books mostly addressing one dimension of happiness, that mainly I realized that in modern times, the emphasis is all about pleasure, is all about, in economic terms, we call utility maximization. And I realized that life goes beyond just pursuing pleasure or pursuing fun. And what I find out that happiness is perhaps multidimensional, and I call it 3D, 3-dimension. And the way I describe it in the book, that there is basically pleasure dimension, the first dimension that everyone mainly knows about it, but there's also meaning dimension and spiritual dimension. And that's mainly by the pleasure dimension. We all know that when we try to maximize our pleasure through what I call it having or doing or being or loving. So in a sense that we try to really possess some things, we try to have certain experience, we try to gain certain position, or we try to establish certain relationship. And all of those eventually give us certain pleasure, that's undeniable. But the problem is that I find out that although all of those eventually will hit to the dead end, I call the dead loop. Mainly it's start with deprivation, that you don't have some things, and then you look at others, they have it, then you emulate them, I call emulation phase. And then you work very hard, as it was my case, to accomplish, but then at the end you get disappointed because it doesn't really give you the lasting satisfaction that you are looking for. I call it a dead loop. And in this regard, that I think it's important to look at other dimension, what I call the meaning dimension. And you try to go beyond pleasure and fun. You try to do something that you find meaningful in terms of, let's say, establishing family, raising kids, writing book, or engaging in certain activity that you think is really going to make some meaningful contribution to whatever cause that you believe in. But then I find out even this will eventually hit the dead end, that when you particularly reach a certain age and start to question the ultimate meaning of those activities, and when you find out that as a mortal living beings, that they all going to eventually be wiped out. And that's basically, again, become another problem, and I call it dead end. And that's how you start to look at some dimension I call spiritual dimension, that will give you certain hope or belief that what you're doing is going to be lasting beyond even your life on this planet. So, and that's how I basically define, meaning dimension, spiritual pleasure dimension, and spiritual dimension as a three dimension of happiness. And my argument in the book is that it's misleading if we just think that happiness lies within the pleasure dimension. Oh, pleasure is a part of life, it's important for happiness, but it is not sufficient for us as a human being, that we need to also somehow discover and explore the other dimension of happiness if we want to have a lasting happiness.
Mm-hmm. And with those dimensions being laid out in the book, how did you find out about them? How did you find out about those dimensions of happiness?
Yeah, I think I find out through personal experience and reading of work of great philosopher like Aristotle, Nietzsche. So basically, when you look at that, you find out that there are a certain message within them that can lead you to discover some other dimension of human experience. And also, I have, as an economist, I have been studying and researching this subject for several years. And I actually have developed certain empirical tools to measure and identify the dimension of well-being for individuals. And even in the website that we have, I established for this book, is 3dhappiness.org. Does provide a tool that you can go and assess your state of dimension to see what is your score in terms of pleasure dimension, meaning dimension, and spiritual dimension. And then you can see how it can be related to your level of satisfaction or subjective well-being in life. And I have done some research on this one. I still have many other research, ongoing research on this one. And I basically, the findings from the research and my reading, the philosophical reading, and my personal experience all somehow overlaps in terms of discovering and understanding those three dimensions.
Right. Yes, definitely. There was a lot of research that went into the book in order to get those dimensions of happiness all within there. So it is a dream for many people to seek happiness through money, fun, career, and love. Do you think they are all wrong? And how do their dreams turn into a nightmare?
I think in a book, I have one chapter and I discuss particular American dream or nightmare, I call it. Is it dream or nightmare? And when I look at the data, particularly for the last 100 years, the data clearly indicate that there is a paradoxical situation in which that in one way, people indeed accomplish their dream, that we call it American dream in terms of, let's say, economic well-being. Then overall, that we are better off at least 3 times compared to, let's say, those who live 100 years before us. But despite that, when we look at the well-being data, we find out that we are not better than them, and we're actually even worse than them. We have many problems. Let's say depression is a problem, stress is a problem, suicide is a problem. And against my argument that when you look at the use of drugs and other problems and alcohol, all I argue it's because we are not happy with this one-dimensional happiness that is mainly promoted in consumer culture. And therefore we are not really happy. So saying that I'm not arguing that money is not important at all. And actually my argument in the book is clear. It's interesting. What I find out in my research, you can buy happiness with money only if you are poor, which basically means that money has importance to a certain extent. If you're really poor and deprived of many things, having money will make a significant difference. But beyond a certain level, and it's mainly the discussion among economists, is all about what is the threshold. Like, is it 50,000? Is it 70,000? Is it 100,000? That once you have such amount of income, then basically beyond that, the money has almost no impact on the well-being. So in this regards, that and I think it is misleading to believe that the more money you make it, the happier you will become. Yes, money is important, but money is not everything. So yes, other success, let's say accomplishments, recognition is important, but that's not everything. And that's eventually is part of what I call the dead loop and give you mainly dissatisfaction. So for that reason, and I think it's important to recognize that we need to explore other dimension and go beyond the pleasure dimension in our pursuit of happiness.
Right. And so with everything that's going on in today's time, especially in the current situation, can you still be happy even if you lose your job, make less money, and stuck at home as we are now?
I think the answer is yes. And when you look at the argument in the book, it's very clear that you can be happy even if you're deprived of many things now, as we are going through. How it's mainly through exploring in different dimension, going beyond the pleasure dimension. So with the current situation that we are mainly deprived from seeking the pleasure dimension, but we can easily, and actually we will have more time. We have more time to spend, quality time with our kids, with our family, with our friends, maybe through Zoom now or other means. But basically, it means that we can explore the other dimension. And one, let's say, key argument I can mention as a reader. I will argue that if you're a good reader and if you have good books, you never get bored. You can only get tired, except that, as a human being, when you read, you might get tired. But I think you will never get bored. If you get bored, that means that you're not really reading a good book. So there are many books, millions of books out there. As long as you find good books that you can actually always have certain intellectual enjoyment, that is mainly part of, again, the meaning dimension. So in a sense, that is not everything is just, it's not just, not everything is just a pleasure or fun that we think come through a certain activity that we engage. But I think reading is important, and again, family is important. Exploring the spiritual dimensions is important. Facing some important philosophical question, I think, can again help us to really find some meaning in life. And I think in this regard, as long as we somehow learn how to engage and explore the other dimension, we can be happy even if we are stuck at home.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that makes perfect sense. Trying to focus on something else in order to find that happiness. It makes a lot of sense. And, you mentioned having a great book to read during this situation that's happening now. And yours would be a great book for all of our viewers to pick up and read and learn how to handle these situations and find that happiness. And speaking of our viewers, where can they connect with you at home? Through your website or your social media platforms?
I think that, yes, exactly. Yeah, I have a website called 3dhappiness.org. And on this website, I have a blog there as well that basically they can be part of the discussion. So mainly, as I mentioned, since money is not everything, I did not write this book to make money or to gain fame. I just wrote this book to engage in intellectual discourse with those who are really interested in the subject, and therefore established a website as well to facilitate such communication. And those who are interested, they can visit the website and engage in dialogue and discussion through the blogs there. and read other related research that I'm currently working on.
Right. Yes.
And also they can take this as I mentioned, this quick survey, online survey to find out their scores for each dimension and their level of subjective well-being to see where they stand right now.
Yes, wonderful. So it's a great place to connect with you and to take that test. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you everyone at home that is watching and will be watching from your living rooms as well. And be sure to check out Necati Aydin's book, 3D of Happiness. It's available on all major online retailer sites. And yes, go check it out. It is amazing. It provides great information. And his resource as well, 3dofhappiness.com is great as well to be able to connect with him. So thank you again, Necati. This was so wonderful. And so thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, Wu. It's a great happiness to really talk about happiness anyway. Thank you.
Yes, it is. I completely agree.